The scent of stale whiskey and unwashed bodies hit Harriet Morgan like a wall as she stumbled into Willow Creek's only saloon, desperate for work and out of options. The year was 1876, and the West had not been kind to a woman traveling alone. "Get out." The barkeep's voice boomed across the room before she'd taken 3 steps inside. "We don't serve your kind here." Harriet stood her ground, though her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. 3 weeks on the trail with little food had left her gaunt, her once fine dress now tattered and caked with dust. The stagecoach had abandoned her in this speck of a town after she couldn't pay the remaining fare. "Please, sir," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "I'm looking for honest work. I can clean, serve drinks." A round of laughter erupted from the table nearest the door. "Honest work? Look at her. Filthiest woman I ever laid eyes on." Harriet's cheeks burned. She'd once been the daughter of a respected Boston merchant before her father's debts and subsequent suicide had left her with nothing. She'd headed west on promises of opportunity, only to find hardship at every turn. "I just need a chance," she persisted. The barkeep emerged from behind the counter, a burly man with a face like weathered leather. "You're bringing down the quality of my establishment."
"Out."
"Quality," she muttered, glancing around at the ramshackle saloon with its crooked tables and grimy windows. "That was a mistake." The barkeep grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "You calling my place a dump? That's rich coming from someone who looks like she's been dragged behind a horse from here to Cheyenne." He began pulling her toward the door. Several patrons stood up, forming a jeering gauntlet. "Filthy vagrant. Take a bath, woman. Probably crawling with lice." Harriet fought against her rising tears. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The barkeep shoved her roughly, and she tumbled into the dusty street, landing hard on her hands and knees. Pain shot through her palms as small rocks embedded themselves in her skin. "And stay out," he shouted, slamming the saloon doors behind him. Harriet remained on her knees for a moment, struggling to catch her breath. A passing wagon splashed through a puddle, spattering her with mud.
"Perfect."
She pushed herself up, ignoring the stares of passers-by, and limped toward the edge of town.
"What now?"
Night was approaching, and she had nowhere to go. As the sun began to set over the distant mountains, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples, Harriet wandered to the outskirts of Willow Creek. She found herself near a small creek, perhaps the one that had given the town its name, though no willows were in sight. Just scrubby brush and a few hardy cottonwoods. She knelt by the water, splashing her face and trying to clean her hands. The cool water stung the scrapes on her palms, but it felt good against her sun-baked skin. Her reflection in the rippling surface showed a stranger hollow-cheeked, with dark circles under her eyes and her once golden hair now a dull, tangled mess. "Madam? You all right there?" The deep voice startled her. Harriet scrambled to her feet, nearly losing her balance in her haste. A man sat atop a chestnut horse a few yards away. In the fading light, she could make out broad shoulders, a weathered cowboy hat, and a face partially obscured by several days' worth of beard. She took a step back, wary. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just resting." He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Name's Finn Calloway," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Own a small ranch about 3 miles north of here." She hesitated before answering. "Harriet Morgan. Pleased to meet you, Miss Morgan." He glanced around. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" "I'm considering my options," she said stiffly, unwilling to admit the truth. Finn Calloway's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he understood her situation perfectly. Town's not always welcoming to newcomers, especially those down on their luck. "I've noticed," she said bitterly, then immediately regretted her tone. This stranger had shown her more courtesy in 30 seconds than anyone else had in weeks. "I could offer you a meal," he said. "And a place to sleep in my barn. It's clean, and there's fresh hay. No strings attached," he added quickly. "Just Christian charity." Harriet studied him, searching for signs of deception. She'd met plenty of men with charitable offers that came with unspoken expectations. But Finn Calloway's gaze remained steady, his posture non-threatening. Still, she hesitated. "Why would you help me?" A sad smile crossed his face. "My sister died on the trail from Ohio. Pneumonia took her before we reached Colorado. She was alone except for me. I know how hard the West can be, especially on women traveling by themselves." His words rang with sincerity, and Harriet's resistance crumbled under the weight of her exhaustion and hunger. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's very kind." Finn nodded, then gestured to his horse. "Can you ride? It's not far, but you look ready to drop." "I can manage," she said, though in truth, she'd ridden only a few times in her life. He helped her mount, his hands respectful and steady, then swung up behind her. The horse snorted and began walking north, away from town. Harriet sat rigidly at first, uncomfortable with the proximity to a stranger, but eventually, fatigue won out. She found herself leaning back slightly against Finn's solid chest. They rode in silence as darkness fell completely, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves and the occasional cry of a nightbird. Stars emerged overhead, more than Harriet had ever seen in Boston, a glittering canopy stretching from horizon to horizon. "Almost there," Finn said after what seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. In the moonlight, Harriet could make out the silhouette of a modest cabin with a barn nearby. A dog began barking as they approached, racing toward them but quieting at a word from Finn. "That's Ranger," he said. "Good watchdog, but friendly once he knows you're welcome." He helped her dismount, and Harriet's legs nearly buckled beneath her. Finn's hand caught her elbow, steadying her without comment. "Let me stable Daisy, and I'll fix us something to eat," he said. Harriet followed him to the barn, where he efficiently unsaddled the horse and provided her with water and feed. Ranger, a large black and tan dog of indeterminate breeding, circled around them, occasionally sniffing at Harriet's skirts. "He won't bite," Finn assured her. "I'm not afraid of dogs," she said. "We had several when I was growing up." The memory of her father's hunting hounds brought an unexpected pang of homesickness. Inside the cabin, Finn lit a lamp, illuminating a small but tidy space. A wood stove stood in one corner, a table with 2 chairs in another. A curtain partially concealed what appeared to be his sleeping area. "It's not much," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "It's perfect," Harriet replied honestly. After weeks of sleeping under the stars or in crowded stagecoach stations, the cabin seemed like a palace. Finn busied himself at the stove, heating beans and bacon in a cast iron skillet. The aroma made Harriet's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. "Been a while since you ate?" he asked, not turning around. "A day or 2, she admitted. He nodded without comment and continued cooking. Soon, he placed a plate before her, piled high with beans, bacon, and a chunk of cornbread. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Your stomach will need to adjust." Harriet tried to follow his advice, but the food was too tempting. She devoured it as politely as she could, fighting the urge to lick the plate clean. Finn ate more moderately, watching her with something like concern in his eyes. "There's more if you want it," he said when she finished. She shook her head, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Thank you. It was delicious." He nodded, then rose and filled a basin with water from a bucket. "You might want to wash up a bit before sleep," he said. "I'll fetch you a blanket for the barn and give you some privacy." Harriet waited until the door closed behind him before approaching the basin. The water was cool but clean, and she did her best to wash her face and hands. Without soap or a proper bath, there was little she could do about the rest of her, but even this small ablution made her feel more human. True to his word, Finn knocked before re-entering, a thick blanket draped over his arm. "I've put fresh hay down in the loft," he said. "It's the warmest spot in the barn." "Mr. Calloway," Harriet began, then faltered. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he said simply. "Get some rest, Miss Morgan. Things often look brighter in the morning." Ranger followed them to the barn, then surprised Harriet by choosing to stay with her, curling up at the base of the ladder to the loft. The hay was surprisingly comfortable, and the blanket smelled of soap and sunshine. Despite her strange surroundings, Harriet fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. She woke to sunlight streaming through cracks in the barn roof and the sounds of activity outside. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous evening. Ranger was gone from his post, and the door stood slightly ajar. Harriet descended from the loft, wincing at the stiffness in her body. Outside, she found Finn chopping wood, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He paused when he saw her. "Morning," he said. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted. "Thank you." He nodded toward the cabin. "There's coffee on the stove if you want some. And I've drawn water for washing up." Inside, Harriet found not only coffee but a large copper tub filled with steaming water. A sliver of soap and a clean cloth lay nearby. Finn appeared in the doorway. "I thought you might appreciate a proper bath," he said, his eyes carefully averted. "I'll be working in the corral for at least an hour." "Take your time. There are some clothes there too. They belong to my sister. They might be a bit large, but they're clean." Before Harriet could respond, he was gone, closing the door firmly behind him. She stared at the tub, tears welling in her eyes. A bath. It had been so long since she'd been properly clean that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. And clean clothes. The water was gloriously hot, and the soap smelled faintly of lavender. Harriet scrubbed every inch of her body, washing her hair twice to remove the accumulated grime of her travels. The water turned a disturbing shade of gray, but she emerged feeling renewed. The clothes Finn had left, a simple blue cotton dress, undergarments, and woolen stockings, were indeed a bit large, but blessedly clean. Harriet found a comb and worked through the tangles in her hair, eventually managing to braid it into a semblance of neatness. When she stepped outside, feeling almost like a new person, she found Finn mending a fence near the corral. He glanced up, and something flickered in his eyes before he quickly looked away. "The clothes fit well enough," he said. "Sarah was about your height, though not quite as." He trailed off, seeming embarrassed. "They're perfect," Harriet assured him. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Calloway." "Finn," he corrected. "Mr. Calloway was my father."
"Finn," she repeated.
"Then you must call me Harriet." He nodded, returning to his work. "There's bread and preserves in the cabin if you're hungry." Harriet hesitated. "I should be on my way soon. I don't want to impose." Finn looked up, his expression unreadable. "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air between them. Harriet had no answer. She had no money, no prospects, and the reception in Willow Creek had made it clear she wouldn't find work there. "I'm not sure," she admitted finally. Finn hammered a nail into the fence post with more force than necessary. "I could use some help around here," he said without looking at her. "The place has gotten a bit run down since Sarah. Well, since I've been on my own. I can't pay much, but you'd have room and board, and I'd give you a fair wage when I sell my cattle in the fall." Harriet stared at him, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you do that?" He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "Because I need the help and you need somewhere to stay. It's a practical arrangement."
"People will talk," she said.
A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "People always talk. Besides, I don't go to town much, and I don't particularly care what they think when I do." Harriet considered his offer. Working as a housekeeper for a bachelor was not what she'd envisioned when she'd headed west, but it was honest work. And Finn Calloway had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. "All right," she said finally. "I accept on a trial basis. If either of us finds the arrangement unsuitable, we can end it." Finn nodded, looking relieved. "That's fair. There's a small room off the kitchen. It was Sarah's. It needs some cleaning, but it would be your private space." That settled, Harriet returned to the cabin and found the bread and preserves he'd mentioned. As she ate, she studied her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was sturdy but Spartan, with few personal touches. A small bookshelf held perhaps a dozen volumes. A rocking chair sat near the stove, a half-completed piece of whittling on the seat. After eating, she explored what would be her room. It was indeed small, with just enough space for a narrow bed, a chest for clothing, and a small table. A layer of dust covered everything, and the air smelled stale, but the window opened to a view of rolling hills and distant mountains. Harriet spent the rest of the morning cleaning the room, grateful for the physical activity after so long on the move. She found sheets and a quilt in the chest, shook them out, and made up the bed. By noon, the room looked habitable, if not homey. She was just considering what to prepare for the midday meal when Finn entered, bringing the sense of sunshine and honest sweat with him. "You've been busy," he observed, glancing into the now clean room. "It seems only fair, since you're providing lodging," she replied. He nodded toward the stove. "I usually just have coffee and bread at midday, but there's salt pork if you want to cook something more substantial." "Coffee and bread is fine," Harriet said. "But perhaps I could prepare a proper supper later?" "I won't object to that," Finn said, a genuine smile transforming his features. The expression made him look younger, almost boyish despite the beard. "It's been a while since I've had a meal that wasn't my own mediocre cooking." They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Finn showed her around the small ranch. Besides the cabin and barn, there was a chicken coop with a dozen hens, a vegetable garden that had seen better days, and a corral where 2 horses grazed alongside Daisy. "The cattle are up in the north pasture," Finn explained. "About 30 head. Not a large operation, but enough to support us comfortably." "How long have you been here?" Harriet asked. "For years," he replied. "Sarah and I came west after our parents died. We pooled our inheritance to buy this land." His expression darkened. "She took sick the second winter. The doctor in town said it was pneumonia, but by the time I got her there..." He trailed off. "I'm sorry," Harriet said softly. Finn nodded brusquely. "Been on my own since then. Neighbors help when they can, but the nearest is 5 miles away." As they walked back toward the cabin, Harriet gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "May I ask why you were in town yesterday? It seems you don't go there often." "Supplies," he answered. "And to check if there was mail." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad I was there." Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "So am I." That evening, Harriet prepared a simple but flavorful stew with the ingredients available. Finn ate 2 full bowls, complimenting her cooking with obvious sincerity. "Best meal I've had in years," he declared. "Thank you," Harriet said, pleased. "Though with so few spices, it's hardly my best effort." "I'll pick up more supplies next time I'm in town," he promised. "Just make a list of what you need." After supper, they sat by the stove while Finn returned to his whittling a small horse, taking shape under his skilled hands, and Harriet mended a tear in the blue dress. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, and she glanced up to find Finn watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just thinking it's nice to have company in the evenings." "Yes," she agreed softly. "It is." Days passed, falling into a comfortable rhythm. Harriet took charge of the household tasks, cleaning the cabin until it gleamed, tending to the neglected garden, and preparing meals that grew more elaborate as she inventoried the available supplies. Finn worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences, caring for the livestock, and making repairs to the barn. They spoke little during the day, but in the evenings, they began to share stories. Harriet told him about growing up in Boston, her father's business as an importer of fine fabrics, and the circumstances that had led to her journey west. Finn spoke of his childhood in Ohio, his parents' farm, and his decision to seek a new life in the territories after their deaths. Sarah was engaged, he said one evening, his voice low. Her fiancé was supposed to join us, but he backed out at the last minute. Said the West was no place for a gentleman. His tone made it clear what he thought of the man's character. She was heartbroken, but determined to come anyway. Said she'd rather face the unknown than stay where every street, every shop reminded her of him. She sounds brave, Harriet said. She was, Finn agreed. Braver than me in many ways. A week into her stay, Finn announced he needed to check the cattle in the distant pasture and would be gone overnight. Harriet felt a strange unease at the thought of being alone at the ranch, though she assured him she would be fine. Ranger will stay with you, Finn said, packing supplies into his saddlebags. He's better protection than any lock. After he rode away, Harriet found herself at loose ends. She had finished the essential chores by mid-afternoon and wandered outside, Ranger at her heels. The garden needed weeding, but the sun was too hot for such work. Instead, she explored the perimeter of the property, finding a small pond hidden behind a copse of trees not far from the cabin. The water looked cool and inviting. Glancing around to confirm she was truly alone, Harriet impulsively removed her shoes and stockings and waded in up to her knees, lifting her skirts to keep them dry. The water was deliciously cool against her skin. Ranger watched from the shore, head tilted in apparent confusion at her behavior. It's called enjoying oneself, Ranger, she told the dog. You should try it sometime. As if understanding, the dog bounded into the water, splashing her thoroughly and sending her into peals of laughter. By the time they returned to the cabin, Harriet's dress was damp, but her spirits were lighter than they had been in months. That night, alone in Sarah's bed, Harriet found herself thinking of Finn. He had been nothing but respectful, keeping a careful distance and never saying or doing anything inappropriate. Yet she had caught him watching her sometimes with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Was it possible he was coming to care for her? And more unsettlingly, was she beginning to care for him? She had not come west looking for a husband, but rather independence and opportunity. Yet there was something about Finn Calloway, his quiet strength, his kindness, his evident loneliness that called to her. Harriet pushed these thoughts aside. She had been at the ranch only a week. It was far too soon for such considerations. Finn returned the following afternoon, looking tired but satisfied. Cattle are doing well, he reported. Good grazing up there this year. I'm glad to hear it, Harriet said, pouring him a cup of coffee. Everything was fine here. Ranger took good care of me. The dog, hearing his name, thumped his tail against the floor. Good boy, Finn said, scratching behind Ranger's ears. Then, to Harriet, I brought something back for you. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small paper-wrapped package. Surprised, Harriet accepted it. Inside was a comb carved from horn, simple but beautiful. I passed a Shoshone camp, Finn explained. They often trade small items. I thought. Well, your old one looked like it was about to break. It's lovely, Harriet said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. Thank you. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding, perhaps, or something deeper. Finn looked away first, clearing his throat. I should see to Daisy, he said, rising. She had a long ride. Alone, Harriet ran her fingers over the comb, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The next few weeks brought a deepening of their friendship. Finn began inviting Harriet to accompany him on short rides around the property, teaching her about ranching and the land. She proved a quick study, absorbing his knowledge eagerly. "You have a good eye for the cattle," he told her one afternoon as they rode along the creek that marked the eastern boundary of his property. "That's not something that can be taught." "I find them fascinating," Harriet admitted. "They seem so placid, yet there's an intelligence in their eyes."
Finn smiled.
"Most people just see walking stakes." "Well, I'm not most people," she replied with mock haughtiness. "No," he agreed, his smile fading into something more serious. "You certainly are not." The intensity of his gaze made her look away, suddenly flustered. "We should head back," she said. "I need to start supper." As July turned to August, the days grew hotter, the work more demanding. Harriet's skin tanned despite her best efforts with bonnets and shawls, and her hands grew calloused from garden work and endless washing. Yet she found herself happier than she'd been in years. One evening, as they sat on the small porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Finn turned to her with an unusually serious expression. "I need to go to town tomorrow," he said, "for supplies and to check on cattle prices. Would you like to come along?" Harriet hesitated. Her experience in Willow Creek had been humiliating, and she had no desire to face those same people again. Finn seemed to read her thoughts. "You're different now," he said quietly. "Clean, well-dressed, arriving with me. They'll treat you differently." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'll know they're the same people who called me filthy and tossed me out." "All the more reason to go back with your head high," Finn argued. "Show them they didn't break you." There was wisdom in his words, Harriet had to admit. And a part of her did want to see the shopkeepers' faces when she returned as Finn Calloway's housekeeper rather than a desperate vagrant. "All right," she said finally. "I'll go." Finn's smile was worth the anxiety the decision caused her. "Good," he said. "We'll leave after breakfast." The ride to town the next morning was pleasant despite Harriet's nervousness. August had brought wildflowers to the prairie, splashes of color against the golden grass. Finn pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his early days in the territory. "The first winter was the hardest," he recalled. "Sarah and I barely knew what we were doing. If not for our neighbors, the Hendersons, we might not have survived." "Are they the ones 5 miles away?" Harriet asked.
Finn nodded.
"Good people. You should meet them sometime. Martha Henderson would like you." The idea that Finn was thinking of introducing her to his friends sent a pleasant warmth through Harriet's chest. As they approached Willow Creek, however, her anxiety returned. The town looked much as it had when she'd left it, a dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, horses hitched outside the saloon and general store. Finn must have sensed her tension. "We'll go to Hanson's store first," he said. "Old man Hanson is decent enough, and his wife is a good woman." Harriet nodded, straightening her back as they rode down the main street. She was aware of curious glances from passers-by, some of whom nodded to Finn in greeting. They dismounted outside the general store, and Finn tied their horses to the hitching post. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Harriet took it, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Ready." Inside, the store was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. Shelves lined the walls, filled with everything from canned goods to tools to fabric. A counter ran along the back, behind which stood a thin man with spectacles and a neat beard. "Calloway," he greeted, looking up from his ledger. "Didn't expect to see you for another month at least." His gaze shifted to Harriet, curiosity evident. "Mr. Hanson," Finn replied. "This is Miss Harriet Morgan, my housekeeper." "Miss Morgan, Tobias Hanson." Understanding dawned in the storekeeper's eyes. Pleased to meet you, Miss Morgan." If he recognized her from before, he gave no sign of it. A plump woman emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Finn Calloway, as I live and breathe. And who is this lovely young lady?" "Mrs. Hanson," Finn said, a genuine smile warming his features. "This is Miss Morgan. She's keeping house for me these days." Mrs. Hanson beamed at Harriet. Well, isn't that nice? It's about time that cabin had a woman's touch again. Come, dear, let me show you our newest fabrics. Just got them in from St. Louis last week. Before Harriet could protest, she was whisked away to examine bolts of calico and gingham, leaving Finn to discuss his supply needs with Mr. Hanson. So, Mrs. Hanson said when they were relatively private, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "How did you come to work for our Finn? He's kept to himself since poor Sarah passed." Harriet provided a carefully edited version of their meeting, saying only that Finn had offered her employment when he learned she was seeking work. "Well, I'm glad," Mrs. Hanson declared. "That man needs someone to look after him. Works himself to the bone, he does." She patted Harriet's hand. "And between you and me, dear, he could do with a wife. Not getting any younger, is he?" Harriet felt her cheeks flush. "Our arrangement is strictly professional, Mrs. Hanson." The older woman gave her a knowing look. "Of course it is, dear. Now, what do you think of this blue? It would suit your complexion beautifully." By the time they left the store, Finn's wagon was loaded with supplies, and Harriet had 2 new lengths of fabric, a practical brown for everyday wear and the blue Mrs. Hanson had recommended. Finn had insisted on purchasing them despite Harriet's protests. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said when she objected. They were heading toward the post office when a familiar voice called out from the saloon. "Well, look who it is. Calloway and his charity case." Harriet froze. The barkeep who had thrown her out stood in the saloon doorway, a malicious grin on his face. Finn's expression hardened. "Keep walking," he murmured to Harriet. "He's not worth your time." But the barkeep was not so easily ignored. "Cleaned her up nice, didn't you, Calloway? But we all know what she is." Finn stopped, turning slowly. "And what exactly would that be, Delaney?" His voice was dangerously quiet. The barkeep Delaney seemed to realize he'd crossed a line. He glanced at the growing number of onlookers, then rallied. "A vagrant. A beggar. Not the sort decent folks associate with." "Is that so?" Finn took a step toward the man. "Seems to me the only person here lacking in decency is you." Delaney's face reddened. "Now see here, Calloway. No, you see here." Finn's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. "Miss Morgan is a lady who's fallen on hard times, something that could happen to anyone. She works for me now, and I won't have her disrespected. Clear?" The 2 men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, Delaney looked away. "Whatever you say, Calloway. Your reputation to ruin, not mine." Finn turned back to Harriet, offering his arm once more. "Let's finish our business and head home." The rest of their visit passed without incident, though Harriet was acutely aware of whispers and stares following them. At the post office, Finn collected a letter that seemed to surprise him. "From my cousin in Denver," he explained as they rode out of town. "Haven't heard from him in almost a year." "Good news, I hope?" Harriet inquired.
Finn shrugged.
"Just family matters. Nothing urgent." They rode in silence for a time, the confrontation with Delaney hanging between them. Finally, Harriet spoke. "Thank you for defending me," she said. "But you shouldn't have to fight my battles." Finn glanced at her, his expression softening. "It wasn't just your battle. Delaney's been a thorn in my side for years. Man's a bully and a drunk. Still," Harriet persisted, "I don't want to damage your standing in the community." Finn's laugh held little humor. "My standing, as you call it, isn't something I lose sleep over. The people whose opinions I value, the Hansons, the Hendersons, judge a person by their character, not by gossip." "And how do you judge me?" The question slipped out before Harriet could stop it. Finn was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I judge you to be the strongest, most dignified woman I've ever met. To endure what you have and still hold your head high. It's remarkable, Harriet." His words left her speechless, a lump forming in her throat. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, comfortable, almost companionable. That night, as Harriet prepared for bed, she found herself returning to Finn's words, turning them over in her mind like precious stones. No one had ever spoken of her with such admiration, such respect. It stirred something in her that she'd thought long dormant, a yearning not just for security, but for connection. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in their relationship. Finn began finding reasons to be near the cabin during the day, checking the chicken coop, while Harriet hung laundry, mending harnesses on the porch while she shelled peas. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. One evening, as they sat by the stove with the first chill of autumn in the air, Finn spoke of his plans for the ranch. "I've been saving to buy the Henderson place," he said, whittling a small wooden figure as he talked. "They're getting on in years, thinking of moving to Denver to be near their daughter. The land adjoins mine to the north, good grazing, good water." "It sounds like a wise investment," Harriet commented, looking up from her sewing a new shirt for Finn from fabric purchased in town. "It would mean more work," he continued, his eyes on his carving. "More cattle, more fences to maintain. Too much for one person, really." Harriet's hand stilled. "Are you considering hiring help?" Finn set down his whittling knife, meeting her gaze directly. "No, Harriet. I'm considering a partner." Her heart began to race. "A partner?" "These past months with you here." He paused, seeming to search for words. "The place feels different. Better. You've made it a home again, not just a place to sleep between workdays." "I've only done what you hired me to do," Harriet said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. She had invested herself in the ranch, in making it comfortable not just for herself, but for Finn. "You've done far more than that," he said quietly. "You've brought life back to this place. Back to me." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Finn, I'm not asking anything of you," he interrupted quickly. "Not yet. Just asking you to consider staying. Not as my housekeeper, but as whatever you want to be." Harriet's mind whirled. Was he proposing? Offering a business partnership? The ambiguity left her uncertain how to respond. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally. Finn nodded, his expression closing slightly. "You don't need to say anything now. Just think about it." He returned to his whittling, and Harriet to her sewing, but the comfortable silence they usually shared had been replaced by something tenser, filled with unspoken thoughts. That night, sleep eluded Harriet. Finn's words played over and over in her mind. Whatever you want to be. What did she want? When she'd left Boston, she had dreamed of independence, of making her own way. Yet here she was, dependent on a man once again, though in a very different way than she had been with her father. Finn wasn't trying to control her, she realized. He was offering her a choice. Partnership, not subservience. And in the months she'd known him, he had never once made her feel less than his equal. Was that love? Harriet wasn't sure. She had once thought herself in love with a young man in Boston, the son of one of her father's business associates. But that feeling, a girlish infatuation, bore little resemblance to the deep, steady affection she felt for Finn. Morning brought no clarity. Harriet went about her tasks mechanically, her mind still churning. Finn had already left to check the north pasture when she rose, and she was both relieved and disappointed by his absence. Mid-morning, as she was kneading bread dough, a horse's whinny announced a visitor. Wiping her hands on her apron, Harriet went to the door, expecting to see Finn returning. Instead, an unfamiliar man sat astride a gray horse in the yard. He was well-dressed, with a neat mustache and an air of urban sophistication that seemed out of place on the ranch. "Can I help you?" Harriet called, remaining in the doorway. The man removed his hat. "I'm looking for Finn Calloway." "Is this his ranch?" "It is," she confirmed cautiously. "He's not here at the moment. I expect him back around noon." The stranger dismounted with the awkward movements of someone unaccustomed to riding. "I'll wait if you don't mind. It's rather important." Harriet hesitated. Finn had never mentioned expecting visitors, and there was something about this man that put her on edge. But frontier hospitality demanded certain courtesies. "You're welcome to wait on the porch," she said finally. "I can bring you some coffee." "Thank you, Mississippi." Morgan. Harriet Morgan. A flicker of recognition crossed his face.
Ah, yes.
The housekeeper. Harriet's wariness increased. How did this man know who she was? "And you are?" "Forgive my manners. Lawrence Calloway. Finn's cousin from Denver." The letter from the post office, Harriet realized. This must be the cousin Finn had mentioned. Still, something felt off about the situation. "Please have a seat," she said, gesturing to the porch chair. "I'll fetch that coffee." As she moved about the kitchen, Harriet kept an eye on Lawrence Calloway through the window. He sat stiffly in the chair, looking around the property with what seemed like a critical eye. When she brought out the coffee, he accepted it with a tight smile. "So, Miss Morgan, how long have you been working for my cousin?" "A few months," she replied, keeping her answers vague. "If you'll excuse me, I need to finish the bread." Inside, Harriet returned to her kneading, but her mind was racing. What business could Lawrence Calloway have with Finn that would bring him all the way from Denver? And why did his presence make her so uneasy? She was putting the bread to rise when she heard Finn's horse in the yard. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern as she heard the sharp tone of his greeting to his cousin. Unable to resist her curiosity, Harriet moved to the window. Finn stood beside his horse, his posture rigid. Lawrence had risen from the chair and was speaking animatedly, gesturing with his hands. Though she couldn't make out the words, the tension between the two men was palpable. After a few minutes, Finn pointed toward the barn, and both men walked in that direction, disappearing from her view. Harriet returned to her work, struggling to focus. Whatever discussion the cousins were having, it clearly wasn't pleasant. She found herself straining to hear their voices, but the barn was too far from the cabin. Nearly an hour passed before the men returned. Finn's face was like a thundercloud as he strode toward the cabin, Lawrence following a few paces behind. "Harriet," Finn said as he entered, his voice carefully controlled. "Lawrence will be staying for supper. He's on his way back to Denver tomorrow." She nodded, noting the way Finn's jaw clenched, the tightness around his eyes. "Of course. I'll set another place." "Thank you." Finn turned to his cousin. "I need to check the south pasture fence. Make yourself comfortable." With that, he was gone again, leaving Harriet alone with Lawrence. An awkward silence fell between them. "Family business can be so tedious," Lawrence said finally, settling into a chair at the table. Finn always was the stubborn one. Harriet made a non-committal sound, checking the stew she had simmering for dinner. "I'm sure you both have your reasons for your positions." Lawrence studied her with newfound interest. "Indeed. You seem quite settled here, Miss Morgan." Something in his tone set warning bells ringing in Harriet's mind. "I'm comfortable, yes." He drummed his fingers on the table. "Did Finn mention our correspondence?" "Only that he received a letter from you recently," she replied cautiously. Lawrence nodded. "Yes, regarding my aunt's estate. Sarah and Finn's mother, you understand. She left some items specifically to Sarah, but since her passing." He spread his hands. "Family heirlooms should stay in the family, don't you agree?" "I wouldn't presume to have an opinion on family matters," Harriet said. Very diplomatic. Lawrence's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But surely Finn has discussed his future plans with you?
Given your
position here." The implication in his words was clear, and Harriet felt her cheeks flush with anger. "Mr. Calloway, whatever you're insinuating—" "Oh, I'm not insinuating anything," he interrupted smoothly. "Merely making conversation. Finn is a grown man after all. His choices are his own. Harriet was saved from responding by a ranger's bark announcing Finn's return. Never had she been so grateful for the dog's keen hearing. Finn entered, his expression marginally less stormy than when he'd left. "Lawrence," he acknowledged his cousin with a curt nod. "The fence secure?" Lawrence asked, his tone suggesting he couldn't care less about the answer. "It is now." Finn turned to Harriet. "Something smells good." "Beef stew," she replied, grateful for the mundane topic. "It'll be ready soon." Supper was a tense affair, with Lawrence attempting to engage Finn in conversation about mutual acquaintances in Denver, and Finn responding with monosyllables. Harriet said little, feeling like an intruder in a family dispute she didn't understand. After the meal, Finn offered Lawrence his bed for the night, saying he would sleep in the barn. Lawrence accepted with a graciousness that seemed at odds with the earlier tension. As Harriet cleared the dishes, Finn followed her into the kitchen area. "I'm sorry about this," he said in a low voice. Lawrence has always had a talent for showing up at the worst possible times. "It's all right," she assured him. "He's family." Finn's expression darkened. "Not by choice." Before Harriet could respond, Lawrence appeared in the doorway. "Finn, might I have a word with you outside? There are a few more details we should discuss." With a resigned sigh, Finn followed his cousin out the door. Harriet finished cleaning up, then retired to her room, exhausted by the day's unexpected drama. Through her window, she could see the two men standing near the corral, their conversation apparently no less tense than before. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams troubled by vague anxieties. She woke to the sounds of movement in the main room. Lawrence preparing to leave, she assumed. Dressing quickly, she emerged to find Finn alone, stoking the fire in the stove. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. Lawrence left at first light. Said he had a long ride ahead. "Is everything all right?" Harriet asked, studying the dark circles under his eyes. Finn poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "It will be." Lawrence brought some complications with him. "Nothing for you to worry about." But there was something in his tone that suggested otherwise. Harriet busied herself preparing breakfast, giving Finn space to gather his thoughts. They ate in silence until Finn abruptly set down his fork. "Lawrence wants me to sell the ranch," he said, the words bursting from him as if he could no longer contain them. "Says there's good money to be made in Denver. Offer to set me up in business with him." Harriet's heart sank. "I see."
And are you
considering it? Finn's gaze locked with hers across the table.
"No."
"This land is my home." "Our home," he added, then quickly corrected himself. "That is mine and Sarah's. It's all I have left of her." "Of course," Harriet murmured, ignoring the strange pang she felt at his correction. "I understand. There's more," Finn continued, his expression troubled. Lawrence brought papers. "Legal documents claiming Sarah's share of the ranch should have passed to our mother's side of the family after her death, since she died unmarried with no children." "He's threatening to take me to court," Harriet gasped. "Can he do that?" "I don't know," Finn admitted. "The deed is in both our names. I always assumed. But I'm not a lawyer." "What will you do?" He rubbed a hand over his face. "Ride into Willow Creek today, see if Judge Patterson is in town. He handles legal matters for the county. Maybe he can make sense of all this. Would you like me to come with you?" Harriet offered.
Finn shook his head.
"Better if I go alone." Lawrence said some things. "It's best if you're not associated with this mess." "What things?" Harriet pressed, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. Finn's expression closed. "Nothing worth repeating. Just Lawrence being Lawrence." He stood, pushing his half-eaten breakfast away. "I should get going if I want to catch the judge before he leaves for his circuit." "Finn," Harriet called as he headed for the door. "Whatever Lawrence said, whatever he's trying to do, you don't have to face it alone." He paused, his back to her. "I know," he said quietly. That means more than you know. After he left, Harriet tried to focus on her usual tasks, but her mind kept returning to the morning's conversation. What had Lawrence said that Finn didn't want to repeat? And why did she have the sinking feeling it involved her? The day dragged on, the hours stretching interminably as Harriet waited for Finn's return. She baked bread, gathered eggs, weeded the garden, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worry. It was nearly dark when she heard Ranger's welcoming bark. Hurrying outside, she found Finn dismounting wearily from Daisy, his expression grim. How did it go? She asked, helping him unsaddle the horse. About as well as could be expected, he replied, his voice flat. Judge Patterson says Lawrence might have a case. Sarah's share could be contested since she died intestate without a will. Oh, Finn, I'm so sorry. He shrugged, leading Daisy into her stall. It's not settled yet. The judge suggested I find a lawyer in Denver, someone who specializes in property law. Might cost more than I can afford, though. There must be another way, Harriet insisted as they walked back to the cabin together. There is. Finn stopped at the porch steps, turning to face her in the deepening twilight. I could sell to Lawrence now, get a fair price instead of risking losing everything in court. The thought of Finn giving up his beloved ranch, their home, made Harriet's chest ache. But you said this place was important to you, that it was your home. It is, he agreed quietly. But maybe Lawrence is right. Maybe it's time to move on. I don't believe that, Harriet said firmly. And I don't think you do either. Finn studied her face in the fading light. Lawrence said something else today. Something about you. Harriet tensed. What about me? He implied that your presence here was influencing my decision to stay. That I was holding on to the ranch because of you, not because of Sarah's memory. And is he right? The question escaped her before she could stop it. Finn's gaze never wavered. Yes. The simple admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Finn, Harriet began, but he shook his head. I'm not asking anything of you, Harriet. I told you that before. But I need you to know the truth. When I think about selling this place, about leaving, it's not Sarah I think of losing. It's you. Harriet's heart hammered in her chest. I would go with you, she whispered. If that's what you wanted. It's not. Finn took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I want to stay here. With you. Build something together. But I won't tie you to a man who might lose everything in a legal battle. You won't lose everything, Harriet said with sudden conviction. Even if Lawrence takes half the ranch, even if we have to start over somewhere else, we would still have each other. Isn't that worth fighting for? Finn's eyes widened, a hope dawning in them that took her breath away. Harriet, are you saying? I'm saying I love you, Finn Calloway, she interrupted, the words bubbling up from a place so deep inside her she hadn't known it existed until this moment. I love your kindness, your strength, your quiet ways. I love the life we've built here. And I'm not going to let Lawrence or anyone else take that away from us. For a moment, Finn stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, slowly, he raised a hand to cup her cheek. I've loved you since I found you by that creek, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Dirty, exhausted, but with your chin up and fire in your eyes. The most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Harriet leaned into his touch, her eyes filling with tears. You poured me a bath, she remembered with a watery laugh, and gave me clean clothes and a chance to start over. I just wanted to help, Finn said. I never expected this. Neither did I, she admitted. But here we are. Finn's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch gentle, as if she were made of porcelain. Here we are, he echoed. And then, with infinite tenderness, he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if he still couldn't quite believe this was happening. But when Harriet's arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, something changed. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into this one perfect moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not because of Lawrence or the ranch or anything else. Just because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." "Yes," Harriet answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Finn Calloway." His smile was like the sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. "Then Lawrence can go to hell," he said, making her laugh. "We'll fight him together." And they did. The legal battle with Lawrence dragged on for months, requiring Finn to make several trips to Denver. But with the help of a sharp-witted lawyer recommended by Judge Patterson, they eventually reached a settlement. Lawrence received a cash payment significantly less than what he had demanded, and Finn retained full ownership of the ranch. Harriet and Finn were married that spring, with the Hansons, the Hendersons, and even Judge Patterson in attendance. Mrs. Hanson cried openly during the ceremony, later telling anyone who would listen that she'd known all along those two were meant for each other. Life on the ranch continued much as before, except now they shared the large bed behind the curtain, and Harriet's small room became a sewing room and, later, a nursery for their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after the sister who had loved the land as much as they did. Years passed. The ranch prospered, expanding to include the Henderson property when the older couple finally moved to Denver. Finn and Harriet added a proper second bedroom to the cabin, then a third when their son Franklin arrived 2 years after Sarah. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play with Ranger's puppies in the yard, Finn took Harriet's hand in his. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "When I found you by the creek?" "Often," she admitted. "How could I not? It was the day my life changed." Finn brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Mine too, though I didn't know it then. I just saw someone who needed help." "You saw me," Harriet corrected him gently. "When everyone else saw a dirty, homeless woman, you saw a person worth helping." "Worth loving," Finn amended. Harriet leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. From desperate beginnings had grown this life of love and purpose, of family, a home, a legacy they were building together. "They called me filthy and tossed me out," she mused, watching Sarah chase a butterfly across the yard. "But you poured me a bath and loved me." Finn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Best decision I ever made." Harriet smiled, knowing he wasn't talking about the bath. "Mine too, Finn. Mine too."